My name's Alexis. Got my coffee here in a kid's cup because ran out of coffee cups, so it's in a kid's cup. Still delicious. Anyway, I chose Alexander Graham Bell because he actually, besides just being a supportive of the oral method, he was involved, or he had a couple other views and was involved in a couple other things that kind of made the deaf community kind of resent him, but not because he also supported them heavily. The first slide there, I have his date of his existence, March 3rd through 1847 through August 2nd, 1922. He had the next slide, he had a few beliefs. He believed that if deaf children signed, they would not be fluent in English. Silly. Another one, he considered deaf people as defective, and that kind of leads into, he believed that the marriage of deaf people would actually result in deaf offspring. We'll go further into that later on. He believed that imposing deaf people through oralism would integrate them into the hearing society. And we know now, today, the deaf community is not integrated into the hearing society because they choose to be, have their own community and have their own socialization, networking, and that's great. Next slide. Many people know of Alexander Graham Bell as inventing the first working telephone in 1876, but he was actually in the works of creating a device to help his deaf or hard of hearing mother hear better but he accidentally created the telephone while he was doing so. So through his invention, Bell actually did not telephone his mother or his deaf wife. So the telephone actually kind of put the deaf community to a disadvantage in society, and it was kind of like that up until technology improved and they created the TTY huge machine, but telephone was not very beneficial to the deaf people. He was involved in two movements, and these movements were mentioned in the Through Deaf Eyes video. It's nativism and eugenics. So nativism, the flood of immigrants was threatening the American way of life. That is kind of the view for nativism. So ethnic groups would set up their own schools. They would have their own newspapers and had their own language, and the deaf community kind of was like that as well. So this made people think that the deaf people as an ethnic group that needed to be assimilated. And Alexander Graham Bell actually believed in that as well. The second one was eugenics. The second movement he was involved in was eugenics. Excuse me. Bell was the chairman of the board of advisors of Eugenics Record Office for 6 years. He was also served as honorary president of the Second International Congress of Eugenics in 1921. So he had a belief, like I mentioned before, he had a belief of two deaf people giving offspring to a deaf child, and biology could not prove that, so he actually did not publish that belief because science could not prove it, because 90 to 93% of deaf children are actually born to hearing parents, and deaf people often give offspring to hearing individuals, so there was no proof there, but he did advocate sterilization for deaf people, so removing their reproduction parts. No good. Fun facts. Bell was a friend of Helen Keller for multiple years as he was proficient in sign language. So he did know sign language. But he did follow the footsteps of his father, uncle, and grandfather as being a speech teacher. But the greatest problem that the deaf community had with him, more so than his support for oralism, was that he was trying to keep deaf people apart, and that was through nativism. And they were like, boy, we are together in this. Anyway, that picture there is Alexander Graham Bell and his wife, Mabel. Bell's impact on deaf education. He established and became the first president of the American Association to promote the teaching of speech to the deaf. This organization promoted speech reading, residual hearing for the hearing impaired population. Bell and his family were actually strong advocates for the oralism method during 1880 in the Milan Conference. And then Alexander Graham Bell's granddaughter actually wrote a letter during Stokey's research on linguistics of sign language. She wrote, I'm guessing, it is cruel that education and teaching speech and reading of the lips to the deaf should go backwards. There's no need for the deaf to have sign language or to be isolated in a gesturing silent world of their own. Ooh, cold. That was found in our book that we are reading for the class. Next slide. He did not believe oralism he did not fully support oralism, like as much as the teachers were, he thought some teachers were too orally focused. He learned sign language, so he wasn't full on support of oralism, but he encouraged finger spelling when the oralism method was not effective. So if the teachers were not successfully teaching through the oral method to the students, he encouraged finger spelling to get the points across so that they could learn. He was committed to the deaf students' education and made that a priority over his own patent on the telephone. So he put the deaf students' education over the developing of his new invention. So that's pretty cool. But I think the reason he began supporting the oral method is because his mother and wife were hearing impaired, and they used oralism, and they saw that was successful. And his wife was actually an oral deaf student, so he saw that become successful, and I think that had a big impact on his support for oralism. And so our book that we are reading actually kind of explains Edward Miner Gallaudet and Alexander Graham Bell being these huge rivals, but they actually were pretty good friends, and their families would get together often and would hang out and stuff. But even though they were two good friends in the beginning, they didn't agree on teaching methods. They weren't actually rivals until, I wouldn't even say they were rivals. They didn't really have problems until Gallaudet was seeking funding for a teaching program for deaf teachers, and Alexander Graham Bell did not advocate for hiring deaf teachers. He was like, nope. And so while Gallaudet was trying to get about $5,000 for the funding, while he was trying to get that, all of a sudden it went down to $3,000, and he believed that Bell had he was part of the reason for that decrease in funding. So, but I believe, I kind of believe that's true. Yeah, so at least they remained friends, hopefully. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for watching. Alexander Graham Bell, telephone inventor. It was actually like this, telephone. That was the old sign. So, yeah, thanks.